this edition, you will meet General Thomas Gage and hear how Britain wants him to carry out his orders. Will he be helpful or more of an enforcer? Tread lightly in this edition of George Washington Speaks. You don't want to make anyone angry.
In order to see the coercive acts carried out, Parliament appointed a military man who was used to obeying orders and carrying them out, regardless of civilian resistance or political considerations. General Thomas Gage was appointed to be both the commander-in-chief of British forces in North America and the governor of Massachusetts, which amounted to martial law. He was given the authority to enact the punitive laws and was allowed to station troops in Boston in order to coerce its inhabitants into obedience. To that end, General Gage attempted to organize a new Royal Council of Residents who were sympathetic to the British Crown in the summer of 1774. However, outside of the city of Boston, local residents forced the appointed members to resign. Some were even imprisoned by the colonists when they resisted resigning. As a result, royal authority collapsed in those areas outside of the city where British troops were not stationed. Parliament was convinced that their control of the port economy, the government, and the judicial system would quickly crush the rebellion in Boston. This, in turn, would keep the remaining colonies from uniting with Massachusetts. But once again, they misjudged the attitude of the colonists, and the exact opposite reaction happened. In response to the coercive acts, Boston refused to pay for the tea, and the rest of Massachusetts rose in revolt. After the Massachusetts government was disbanded, the former elected representatives took control of the province outside of Boston as a provincial congress. This quickly became a revolutionary government. The other colonies, too, viewed the punitive laws of the coercive acts, which we call the Intolerable Acts, as further evidence of Britain's tyranny, and they began to organize their own resistance against the acts. They also sent much-needed supplies to Boston. In Virginia, we landowners of Fairfax County gathered in July to create the Fairfax Resolves, which was our strongest formal objection to the actions in Boston. I chaired that meeting and was appointed to present the 24 resolutions of our resolves to the government in Williamsburg. As you know, up to that time, we had attempted to petition and reason with Parliament, but with the military enforcement of the coercive acts, the Massachusetts Revolutionary Government issued a call for a Continental Congress of all the colonies to be held in Philadelphia. The goal of the Congress would be to form a united response from the colonies. General Gage realized that the coercive acts were not having the desired effects that Parliament had desired. Knowing that his military position was not strong enough to move against the colonists outside of the city, he began to fortify Boston against possible attack. And he increased the number of soldiers in Boston to a force of 2,000. He wrote to his superiors in London a sobering assessment of the results of the coercive acts that he had carried out at their insistence. He told them that if they chose to use the army to quell the Boston resistance, that they should be prepared to send many more reinforcements. But if they chose that course, he cautioned them that they should expect that all of New England would come to the aid of Boston and fight, and that they would fight well. He suggested a second option to subdue the rebellious spirit of the colonists, which would be to impose a complete naval blockade of Boston Harbor. A third solution, which he did not endorse, was to make concessions. Concessions had already been employed in the 1766 Stamp Act and again in the 1770 Townshend Act. However, whatever they chose to do, he made it very clear to them that Britain must now make a very great decision and then be fully prepared to act sooner than later. As the danger of armed conflict approached, colonists were forced to choose sides. Those that chose to align themselves with Britain and support the mother country became known as loyalists, but they were in the minority. Those who actively opposed British policy, they would become known as patriots. Following the example of Massachusetts, patriots everywhere began to change their elected colonial legislatures into revolutionary bodies. They organized committees of safety, dealt harshly with aggressive loyalists, and sent protests to London, and even elected delegates to a Continental Congress, which the Massachusetts revolutionary government had called for. The Congress met in Philadelphia in September 1774 to discuss a united response to the many and increased encroachments of Parliament and the Crown into the affairs of the colonies. I arrived at that gathering as a representative of Virginia, and I wanted to be seen as a Virginian standing for the rights of the colonies.
If you were General Gage, would you have come up with any other options? Do you agree with how the colonists reacted to the intolerable acts? Did the acts separate New England from the rest of the colonies? And did it teach all the British colonies a lesson? Was it the lesson that the English government had hoped to teach them? If not, what was the lesson? Join us next time to see how the colonies respond to the enforcement.